That's the quote. We'll leave it at that. So what do we plan when we plan training loads? So, and this is, I'll tell you, this is it's a very, very simple and effective way for any coach, any player at any level, anywhere in the world, that you can get good, accurate, and optimal planning of your training without spending any money or using any advanced technology. That's where like this sort of theory and methodology, this stuff that I teach, a lot of this came out of the fact that I have, as I mentioned, I've worked for many years in my career at the amateur levels and also even at the top levels. And you'd be surprised, and I think even Anthony may back me up on this, from his experience in Trinidad, but you don't always see at the top levels of our sport that there's just like this unlimited, funding and resources and equipment and technology. That's not the case. I think maybe that's what some people think. They think, oh, well, at the amateur level, we don't have any, any money or technology, but at the pros, they do. Sometimes they do, but a lot of times they don't. And as I said, I've worked at all of the highest levels you can work at here in Canada. And still, most of the time I use this method rather than heart rate monitors and GPS and camera-based systems, because it was very rare that we had access to that stuff. And even at TFC and even at the Ottawa Fury, we didn't always have access to it. So this is a way that it's a simple, it's not even cost effective. It's actually free. It only costs you a little bit of time. Simple way that you can do this, and any player can do it. So this is how it's done. We got to understand what we're tracking. What are we tracking and monitoring? Something called training load, and I use the initials or the acronym TL for that. So what is it? It's based on this formula: V times I, and V is volume, that's the training time in minutes, and I is the intensity of the training, and that's rated by each player on a scale from 0 to 10. You can see on the right here, this is just a simple scale that allows players to rate the intensity of their training from 0 being rest to 10 being maximal or the hardest possible exercise you can do. And if I'm speaking to an individual player here, you can do this for every one of your training sessions. You can look at, and just to be clear, volume, when we're talking training time, we're not talking about if the training was 90 minutes, that's the volume. We have to look at how much time within that 90 minutes were you playing, because you probably had water breaks and rest periods. And so, the best way to do it is to have a stopwatch. Again, a coach or player or parent, anyone can do this. You time, you hit the stopwatch every time when you start warming up, when you start moving and active, and when you have a break for water or rest or whatever, you stop it. And at the end, again, maybe a 90-minute training session, you were active for 60 minutes or 65 or whatever, but you have that number. So you take that number, and then you just have a look at that scale right at the end of training. You can print it up on a clipboard, or you can have it on a phone, on a picture, whatever it is. Look at it and say, okay, well, you know what? I think this session was about a 7, That's how hard it was. So you take the number in minutes that you trained for, you multiply it by the number of the intensity that you gave. And again, that RPE, that acronym stands for rating of perceived exertion, literally means your perception of how hard you train. And when you multiply the training time in minutes times the rating of perceived exertion from 0 to 10, then you get this number called training load. And if you do that every day, then you can start to track your training load, and you can start to then plan training based on how you're performing, and you can monitor and adjust based on the numbers that you see. And as I said, it's simple, it's free, it requires no technology, no money, nothing, just a little bit of time and effort on behalf of a coach or players, and you can get this. And this is as effective and as accurate as using technology like heart rate and GPS, as long as players are honest and disciplined and they do it. That's the reason why I teach it like this. So this is it. That's how you plan for it, and that's how you track it. And I'll say these are frequently asked questions. I think at the end, I'm happy, of course, if anybody watching, if you've got questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. But these are 2 frequently asked questions, which I think can help you to maybe wrap your head around planning and how hard should the training be and so on, based on that model that I've just shown you. One of them is, what is a good training load? What constitutes good? What number? Should it be 1,000? Should it be 500? Should it be 200? Whatever. And then second, how can you progress training load from 1 week to the next? And this has to do with, as a soccer player, from 1 week to the next, if your training load is always the same, you can understand that that's probably not good, because that means you're not going to push yourself hard enough to achieve results. So you want to be able to progress from 1 week to the next, because that's going to make you better. But how can you do that? So these are really, if I had to whittle it down, the two kind of most common, frequently asked questions. This is it. What's a good training load? What should that number be? And then once I know that, how do I progress it? How do I go from 1 week to the next? So let's start with the first one. What is a good training load? Well, you need to use the game as your benchmark or standard in order to answer that question. So a typical game, this is universal. This is where we get to the science, right? So here, there's no art here. This is everybody's on the same page with this. We must be. What's the volume? It's 120 minutes. That includes the warm up. And remember, when you're thinking about volume, how much you're active, you're not just active for 90 minutes. You're active for 120. Typically, a warm up should be about 30 minutes. So that's 120 minutes of volume. And intensity, this is, I've had discussions, sometimes even arguments with coaches about this, but I'll tell you that, when we're talking, again, I'm speaking to coaches and players here that are thinking collegiate soccer, university soccer, professional soccer, the intensity has to be 10 out of 10. It really has to be. Okay, it should be very rare. And again, I can say this from my own experience at the top levels. I almost never spoke to a player at the end of a game and they told me that their intensity in that game was less than 10. Almost never. Only if it was maybe a substitute that came in the 75th minute or something and didn't play the full game. Goalkeepers, sometimes they're a bit of a wild card. Maybe if there's any goalkeepers in the audience or whatever, we can speak to that. Their numbers might be a bit lower, but the typical outfield player playing 90 minutes plus a 30-minute warm-up, we're going to expect to see an intensity rating of perceived exertion of 10. So if the volume is 120 and the intensity is 10, well then the training load is 1200. That's what it is. So that's a typical game. And once we know and understand and accept that that's the highest that it can be. That's the highest that any day's training load can be. 1200, 120 multiplied by 10. So now that that we understand that that's our benchmark, that's our standard, now we have to look at planning training throughout the week. And again, this is material taken from my course. One of the courses I teach, by the way, this topic, I should say, it's a 4-month course with 2 lectures per week that are 3 hours each. So we're talking, dozens of hours, and I'm condensing this into, hopefully only 30 minutes or so. So we're oversimplifying here, but I want you to all take a look at this little graph on the right here, okay? So what this is showing you is a typical week in soccer, the way it should be if you want results. And what you can see is that if we look at the highest load or the highest intensity days, in 1 week, players are really only capable of two high intensity or high load days every week. So what does that mean? If you have more than 2 consistently, you could do it once, you could do it for a few weeks maybe, but if you have more than 2 consistently, it's going to lead to sickness and injury. And this sounds like, maybe like common sense, right? Like you need time to recover after a hard training session. It sounds like common sense, but I can tell you from my own experience, from having been a player at the university level and semi-professionally here in Canada, and also from a lot of the coaching that I've done, that it isn't always the case that a training schedule every week at the top level looks like this. Coaches make mistakes with this. They push their players too hard sometimes, and sometimes it isn't even the coaches. Sometimes it's just a competitive schedule. So again, I'm not sure what the university schedule looks like in Trinidad, Anthony, but I can tell you here, we still in Canada play 2 games per week on Saturday and Sunday, back to back. And I've actually looked all over the world. I've written articles about this, and I've been kind of critical because I am still an assistant coach at the university level here, and so I'm still involved with a lot of the league administrators, and I've been very critical of this. I don't think there's anywhere else in the world that does that Saturday and Sunday all year. I don't know. I want to. Hey.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's tough. Yeah.
Tough.
So in any case, so this is something that, again, it sounds like common sense, but it's not always done. So your week has to look like that. You have to have, really no more than 2 high load days, and you want to try to have as much time in between one high load day and the other, 2 or 3 days, in order to recover. So that's what it needs to look like. Here's just an example. Okay, a sample training week. This was from the last professional club that I worked with, which was the Ottawa Fury in the USL. So I want to just show you, this is literally taken directly from my own experience in the pro game. Monday was a recovery day. Volume was 30 minutes. Intensity was only 4 out of 10 average. So the training load was 120. That was a low day. And by the way, that was the day after a match. So that's the reason why it was so low. Tuesday, we focused on training the aerobic system. The volume was 60 minutes. It was a 1 hour. That's 1 hour of actual activity, not one. The training was 90 minutes, but 1 hour of actual activity. The average intensity was 7 out of 10, and the training load was 420. Obviously, much higher. Okay. Wednesday, the volume was a little higher. It was up to 70 minutes, and the intensity, because we worked on the anaerobic lactic system. I'll speak about that, what those mean in a few minutes, just but so you understand that it was Wednesday was higher intensity than Tuesday, higher volume and higher intensity, and so the training load was higher. Now Thursday, because Wednesday was higher, on Thursday we actually took it back down again. We did something called alactic training, and it's kind of a fancy word for speed training. But in any case, we looked at the alactic system there, 60 minutes volume, intensity only 5, training load only 300. Friday, we went back to the aerobic system. We raised it up a bit, not a lot of volume. Intensity was a little higher though. It was a 7. Training load was 350. Here we have Saturday. This is the day before the next match. Again, the volume was very low. It was primarily set pieces, a little bit of sprinting. Intensity was only 4 out of 10. And again, a low training load of only 160. And then Sunday was the game. And again, we had a volume of 120. The actual average intensity in that game was a 9. Again, there were some substitutes and goalkeepers that brought that average down from being a 10. But the training load there, 120 multiplied by 9 is 1,080. So if you look at this sample week and then you look at the little chart on the right, you can kind of see that they line up. You've got really the high load days in this week are the Wednesday, the anaerobic lactic system with a high of 630, and then some recovery, and then the game on the Sunday with a very high training load. And that's an optimal way for soccer players to have their physical training load every week, because it gives you those high load days. You need those. Because without those, you're undertrained, but it gives you enough recovery and lower, moderate and lower load days in between in order to recover. So I guess I do see a question that just popped up here. So Sharif says, if the training time is 40, what does that represent in terms of time? So the simplest answer to that, Sharif, is we're talking, that was the day before the game. We actually, on those days, typically we would only train for 1 hour in total. So that's start of the warm up till, and within that hour, the players were only active for 40 minutes. So there were water breaks, there was some time, time off in between and things like that. So that's basically what it means. And that's why when you look at these volumes, you have to understand that almost every day other than the Saturday, that the total time was 90 minutes, but the players are not active for 90 minutes. And if you just do this exercise with your own team as you coach, you'll see if you start the watch every time they're active and stop it every time they're not, you'll probably see, maybe they're active for half the time, or maybe they're active for 60 or 70% of the time. They're typically not going to be active for the whole 90 minutes. That's rare. So in any case, that's the idea. So hope that makes sense to you. Yeah, got it. Okay. All right. So and I'll just speak just one more thing briefly about this intensity from 0 to 10, just because if there are any coaches or sports scientists in the audience that have seen other scales, because there's the one I'm using is the 0 to 10 scale, but there are other ones that you can use. There's a 6 to 20. There's even 0 to 100. There's many. The reason I like 0 to 10 is because with any coach, with any player, even a real beginner, someone that's young, that's never seen it before, it's very easy to understand. It's intuitive what those numbers mean. So if I said that this workout was 6 out of 10, it's very easy for anyone, any coach, any player to understand that 6 out of 10 means 60%. That's how hard I worked. I worked at 60% of my maximum capacity. If it's 9 out of 10, okay, that's 90%, and so on. So I like that scale really because it's simple, it's intuitive, and anybody can understand it pretty much right off the bat. So that's it. That's a sample week. And remember, because we're talking about an art, not a science, there's 1,000 ways that you can get these numbers with your training. You don't need to do it, I mean, exactly the way I've said it or the way I've shown it, but that's what you want. You want a nice, wave-like pattern of high and lower intensity. So